Hi, this is Jeff Harmon with Brilliance Within, coming to you today with a new episode of Conversations That Life Science Leaders Aren't Having. I'm really grateful today to invite as a guest Eric Richman. Eric is currently the CEO of Gain Therapeutics based in Bethesda, Maryland, and with offices and team members all over the globe where they're developing innovative therapies for neurodegenerative diseases. Who Eric is to me is energy, passion, and wisdom. And I think all of those ways of being really are on full display in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Eric, it is so exciting to have you. I've been looking forward to this conversation since we had a chance to meet a month or so ago. And we just did a short intro of who you are to me. I'd love for you to start our conversation out and just clue us in a little bit on what you're up to in the world.
Sure. Well, Jeff, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I have spent about 25 years in early stage biotech companies, both as a venture investor and also in operations, in building companies, starting companies, and working at companies. And a lot of my focus has really been on creating new treatments for diseases with unmet medical needs. And that's something that has driven me since the day I started in biotech. And it's something that I find very rewarding, very exciting. And it's something that I continue today. So today, my current role, I am Chief Executive Officer of a company called Gain Therapeutics, which is a very interesting, very unique company that's only been possible because of advances in supercomputing and machine learning, artificial intelligence, crossed with a completely separate field of advances in structural biology. And putting these two fields together gives us the opportunity to identify new ways of treating diseases. And that's really the core foundation of the company. It's a platform technology, and we're making great progress in doing just that, finding new ways of treating diseases. I also work with a couple of companies in the pharma services area, one which is a central lab testing company, global company, that is supporting about 460 clinical trials right now. That company is called Lab Connect. And also started a company that is helping deliver some of these very exciting products, which are biologics, to patients through IV administration. So it's an infusion business, ambulatory infusion centers, to provide the infrastructure so that patients will be compliant and get these drugs that we've worked so hard in the industry to develop. So those are, and I also serve on boards of a couple of private and public companies. So that's what I'm up to these days.
When do you sleep?
I used to think that it was very difficult because a lot of the operations at Gain Therapeutics are in Europe. We have offices in Lugano, Switzerland, and in Barcelona. So fortunately, the phone quiets down by mid-afternoon here. So I've got plenty of time to focus on other things.
Awesome. That's awesome. I have to ask, you use the word drive. What drives you? And I'm just curious, what was it that flipped the switch on that drive? Like what's part of your story that sort of just clicked in and then has brought you to where you are today around being driven?
Well, the one thing which hasn't really ever changed, and it's a surprise to me in my career, is my enthusiasm and excitement about science and technology and advances in innovation. And when I first started working with a venture capital firm called Healthcare Ventures back in the late 80s, and the head of it was a visionary named Wally Steinberg. And he came up with this crazy idea of sequencing the human genome and started a company called Human Genome Sciences. And then started another company called Genetic Therapy, Inc., and actually using genes to deliver genes to patients that have mutations and be able to produce proteins. And I thought, that is it. It can't possibly get any more interesting or more exciting than sequencing the human genome and using gene therapy. And as you know, these technologies have become reality, and they've only been replaced by more exciting things. And there are so many exciting things going on in biotechnology and pharmaceutical industry and science that I love to keep up with it. I love to understand how merging different technologies can enable new treatments. To me, that's what drives me. That's really exciting, and I never get tired of it. And it's something that I don't necessarily seek out, but I'm fortunate to have a lot of friends in the business, and I'm always hearing about new things and new inventions, for example, in academic centers or in pharma companies and venture capital firms. And it's so exciting, and it just doesn't seem to slow down. So that's what drives me to a large extent.
Yeah, I mean, we're not in the same room, but your energy is contagious. Your body leaned in and your voice sped up, and it was just, yeah, I was totally engaged. I work in the space with other leaders, but so there's a level of excitement that I have, but yeah, just really feel the energy that you bring. I'm wondering what are the earliest traces of your passion and love for science and learning? Where can you trace that back to a earlier point in your life?
Well, I grew up in a family that's very scientifically focused. My brother is a physician. My sister has a PhD in astrophysics. And we didn't sit around and talk about equations and things like that at the dinner table, but we had a similar way of thinking. And I think when I think about how we present arguments, how we discuss things, it's almost similar to when you see a presentation from an academic professor on some new area. It's structured in that way. And I've always been very science-minded, and it's something that has just always thrilled me. I'm not really sure there's any specific event that led me this way, but I never got bored. And I think that people change careers a lot of times because they get bored, and this area gets more and more exciting.
I had somebody mention recently that we are in it now, or we are on the doorstep of the golden age around some of the developments around treatment because of the accessibility of data and the availability of data. And do you agree with that? Are we, in your mind, are we at the doorstep or actually already in this golden age?
I believe so. I think that by combining different fields and being able to look at issues and problems and creating new tools to understand complex biological functions, that has improved dramatically over the last several years and continues. I mean, some of the tools that are being developed for our industry are just absolutely remarkable. And a lot of the technology comes from other areas. So, just sequencing the human genome, for example, provided so much information. But what really is most interesting is that there are pockets of patients that suffer from rare diseases, for example, that maybe they weren't diagnosed because there was no treatment available, but they're real diseases. They have a real impact on patients' lives, their families' lives. And with various diagnostics and various tools, I've been lucky enough to be involved in creating new products for these patients. And frankly, it's very fulfilling. So when I was at a company called MedImmune many years ago, there was an infectious disease called respiratory syncytial virus that affected premature infants. And there was no vaccine, there was no treatment, there was nothing for these patients. And we developed actually two products for RSV that were the first products for this patient population. And suddenly, and with the advent of that product and making that available, mortality in these patients dropped dramatically, morbidity dropped, and was able to really see and understand how some of these advances translate into reductions in mortality and morbidity. And I've been fortunate to be able to continue my career and work with companies and work with people that have developed new products for unmet medical needs. And that's very, very fulfilling, especially when you talk to the patient associations and really see how these products affect people's lives.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's so exciting. The more I think I shared with you, I'm a patient. Everybody's a patient in one way, but yeah, I am so grateful. I mean, just on a personal note, although you're not working on my particular disease, it's when I hear the passion that people like you come to the table with and come every day I almost breathe a sigh of relief, like, thank goodness guys like Eric and teams like his are doing this work, because it's so exciting and so grateful. I'm so grateful.
Yeah, well, I'm very lucky because the people that I work with are very much like that as well. And maybe it's an observation in an experiment that leads to a discovery that leads to, you never know where it's going to come from. And what I'm working on right now at Gain Therapeutics is super, super exciting, because this area of neurodegenerative diseases is really an area that has inadequate treatments that are available for patients in these terribly progressive diseases with tremendous amount of morbidity, mortality, but also most importantly, adversely affects quality of life. Mm-hmm. And I think the next decade and a half is really the discovery age for new treatments in central nervous system disorders for a variety of reasons. But what we're doing at Gain is we're looking at, for example, Parkinson's disease, where there really are no adequate treatments. There's very little that's proven to be effective in the clinic. But instead of coming up with a treatment that we think is going to treat all Parkinson's patients, we're looking at genetically defined populations that end up developing Parkinson's disease. So very small segments of patients that develop Parkinson's disease. And this is the way, for example, there have been so many advances in oncology over the past 2 decades. You used to think about breast cancer as a single disease, but in fact, it's many, many different diseases. There's HER2 positive, HER2 negative, BRCA gene. Only by segmenting that population by genetics, we were able to make progress in this area. And I see the same thing with central nervous system disorders. And we are moving down a path of a very specific genetic mutation where these patients develop the most severe and earliest onset form of Parkinson's disease. And no, we probably won't have a treatment that will treat all patients, but we're going to have likely or hopefully have a treatment, and we're making great progress with the treatment that will be able to be useful in a disease-modifying way for this patient population that has a genetic mutation. And I'm sure there are others that are looking at other genetic mutations that in central nervous system disorders, and it's exciting. I really think that the next 2 decades, you're going to see a lot of advances in CNS.
Yeah. Again, thank you for your passion. It's really, it's very exciting. It's very exciting. So you've been in this space for a long time, and you've seen a lot, both as a contributor as well as a leader. Where we are today in life science, in this, call it the golden age, if we want. But what are the conversations that we're not having enough that we should be having, given where we are in this journey?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of things have to come together in order to develop new treatments. First of all, ideas, smart people, dedicated people. Then there's a regulatory path that has to be followed, and there's a regulatory agency that is excellent. They work extremely well on a variety of different areas. And there's also funding. And where we are today, and what we've just seen over the last 2 years, is being able to take a vaccine with a novel technology and create a vaccine for an emerging infectious disease like COVID-19 and do it in a very, very short period of time. That's possible. That's possible if we make some changes in some of the regulatory path. If there are promising treatments or technologies, being able to evaluate them perhaps in a different way or in a shorter path for patients that have no other alternatives. That's one of the things that I do hear some talking about that, and I think that's great. And I think that's been enabled by the advances during COVID. But right now, in the last year or so, the biotech industry has really suffered a big loss in valuation for a variety of reasons. Some of it related to COVID, wars, all the things that are going on in our world right now. But also a reluctance of investors to step in because valuations are falling. And this has been going on now since February 9th of 2021. And what is the impact of this? The impact is that when companies have a lower valuation, they tend to select which programs they want to move forward with. They have to figure out how to finance the company and have a longer runway. So if they have it's much harder to finance. So if they have a set amount of cash, they're going to pare down all their different ambitious programs. They're going to focus on those that are they've already invested the most money, and perhaps those that lead to value inflection points in the near term. And what concerns me is, what are those programs that were being developed? What's happening to them? Are they being put on the shelf? Where there was great enthusiasm 2 years ago and great progress, because of a lack of funding and the ability to finance companies. What's going to happen in development of these programs? And ultimately, what happens to the patient populations that could benefit from the maturation of these drugs and bringing them to market? So I hear a lot of talk. A lot of people are talking about. I just went to an investment banking conference about a week ago in Miami, and frankly, it was very, very depressing because most biotech companies are trading at cash value or below cash, which actually means that whatever we're doing has no value. And I can tell you that drugs do have value. And new drugs, new biologics, new approaches, there is value, not only financial return, but value to patients and their families. And that's a concern of mine, is that this lack and reluctance to finance biotech companies is going to result in getting products to market slower and fewer products to market.
So what is the opportunity in that? What's the conversation thereby? What's the opportunity in that?
Well, I think that typically what happens, and we've had a lot of ups and downs in the biotech industry and every industry, and typically after there's a prolonged downturn, companies tend to focus on their most valuable assets, and they become very realistic about operations. And then there's either M&A, which occurs from big pharma trying to pick up programs and companies. But also most commonly, you'll likely see consolidation. And so if there are 3 companies that are focusing on central nervous system disorders, maybe you don't need 3 management teams, 3 financial teams, 3 investor relations teams. Maybe you put them all together, you realize various synergies, and you move these programs forward. So I think that it's kind of maybe a natural pruning, or the way I like to think about it is an increase in efficiency in working together with other companies.
If you put yourself in the shoes of one of those CEOs who's facing the realities that you just described, what, and your vision, your passion is as full as maybe as it was, but given the realities, how would you advise that leader to engage with their team, to keep with the funding that they do have, to pull out the best in them? What are you advising or telling that CEO?
Well, the way I think about it is when there's and we experienced this at MedImmune very early on. We had a clinical study that was not successful statistically, but we saw a lot of promise in this product, and we ignored the financial markets. We ignored investors. We ignored everything that was going on. We ignored all the analysts that were following the company. The stock dropped dramatically, and the CEO of the company, Wayne Hochmeyer, said, "Put your head down and focus on execution." And we redid the clinical study. A lot of people left the company at the time because there was a lot of uncertainty, but we just focused on blocking and tackling and getting from one step to the next step to the next step. And a few short years later, the clinical trial was repeated. It was efficacious. The product was approved, and there was a new product for this disease that had never been treated previously. So I take from that, and I talk to my colleagues, and when we talk about, like, what do you do in this environment? You can't spend half your day talking with investors who are upset because they bought it at a higher price and it's lower today. You have to think about the long-term impact of what it is that you're doing and execution. And every minute that you're on a phone talking with investors is time that you're not focused on moving these programs forward. So we're just, we've got our heads down, we're focusing on execution, and we're trying to do more with less and becoming much more capital efficient.
It reminds me of a quote by a football coach who would famously say, we're not looking at the Super Bowl. Just do your job. You're on the offensive line, make the best block that you can, focus on executing that first play. And then if the Super Bowl comes, that's great. But it feels like such a wise approach in whatever, whether you are flush with cash and investment and valuation, or I'm not sure what tomorrow will bring. It just feels like such a wise, some wise counsel for wherever that company finds itself.
Yeah, I mean, for employees, for the people who are actually working on a daily basis, it can be frustrating to them because they know that they have a technology that is going to be fruitful in developing new drugs. And maybe they can't work on 5, they can only work on 2. Right. And so it's this frustration that they have, like, can't we try this and can't we try that? And it's like, that'll come, that time will come. But first we have to be successful in our key programs. So I think that is broadly applicable to a number of different areas and industries. Yeah.
And you're bringing in the subject, especially in the life science space, biotech, pharma. You're dealing with some of the smartest people in the world, often, wherever they are. Given the landscape, not just this unique landscape that you described, but just there's the term that's being used, the Great Resignation, and we're going to a more employee-centric environment. What's required from your seat? What's required as you are leading people that might be different than it was 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
Well, I think by virtue of either the pandemic where people are working at home, or the internationalization of companies where you've got people all over the world working, we find ourselves with offices in Barcelona, in Switzerland, in the headquarters here where I am, Bethesda, Maryland, and our collaborators are all over the world. And so I actually think that it's become more efficient. We're actually able to communicate almost around the clock because there are people in different areas. We have some people in California as well. I don't think that I don't think that there's anything all that different. I think the challenge is to have communication that's effective. and being able to have the types of communication that you would have in an office environment where we're all sitting in a conference room, but have it with all employees or all the key decision makers. That's been somewhat of a challenge, but we're getting used to it. And I think that I don't know if we're going to go back to the way things were, but I actually think that it's increasing efficiency.
Mm. And so while it is maybe not, as you observed, massively different, what is being called forward by you, of you as CEO, that's unique today, 2022?
Well, look, every biotech company, every company in the world, they have a plan. Then they have a risk mitigation plan in case something goes wrong. But in today's environment, we have risk mitigation plans to our risk mitigation plans, because just things don't move around the world that they used to. Clinical samples don't move from, let's say Australia to other parts of the world because the airspace in Russia is closed off. You have to adapt very, very quickly. That the minute that you put together a plan to execute on, to get something done, the minute that plan is done, it's basically out of date because new factors are coming up every day. And you have to be very, very nimble. You have to be very quick. You have to be able to make decisions very rapidly as a team, not as because you have to understand these risks. And used to be years ago when there was an issue as an employee, you never heard about it. You never really heard about it. There was people worried about it, but you never really heard about it. Now we talk about all these risks all the time, and so employees are always thinking, if I can't get samples across this border or to that CRO or to this they're always thinking of dual ways of getting things done. And we do a lot of things in parallel just to mitigate those risks. That's something very different than I thought about years ago.
And if we were to ask your team, what do you need most from Eric and the senior leaders at Gain? What would they say that they need most from you?
They would say a clear vision of where we're going. What are we? Where are we going? What's our priority? And that's something that, look, in the scientific field, it's always been a challenge because you have these brilliant people that see things happening and they love working on that program, but there's always side projects going on and you gotta keep them focused. And in order to keep them focused, they need to hear, what are the goals? What are the objectives? Where are we with these objectives? Have these objectives changed? They need that sense of direction and leadership.
Mm-hmm. It also, just from my conversations, and I don't know if your people would say this or not, but it feels like what's required even more today than ever before is an environment where they feel safe, not physically safe. Maybe that's part of it, but to use the term that Google tapped into, psychological safety, that maybe they wouldn't be able to, your people or employees wouldn't be able to put words to it, but it feels more and more like that people want to feel safe. And my sense, just listening to you, is that with clarity comes this feeling of, okay, the folks who are leading, they know what they're doing. They're smart people, and so my sense is the clarity that you communicate with, especially the vision, provides that psychological safety for them to be able to keep their head down and to execute. Would you say that's true?
I do think it's true. I think it's very true. What's something very unique about Gain Therapeutics is that a lot of the people within the organization have worked together before in previous companies or known each other. For example, the founder of the company and we've been friends for 15 years, but I've never worked with him before. And so I have this inherent trust in his judgment, and we can have conversations that I don't have to worry about political things. We just can talk about things that are going to drive the programs forward, drive the increased value for our stakeholders. And so that level of familiarity within the company at Gain is really refreshing. And so when new employees come in and they don't have that relationship, they're aware of it. And I think that adds to a level of safety. For example, we had a 4 or 5 hour scientific advisory board meeting yesterday, and we have some really brilliant advisors, and they have so much faith in what we're doing. And these, presenting data, and, so often you're alone in a laboratory, you're generating data, you're reading, you're trying to put together what actually happened in that experiment. And you can see things this way or that way, but until it's in a peer-reviewed journal where there's an agreement that what you've done is an advancement, sometimes you don't get that feedback. And with our scientific advisory board, they get that feedback. And we have those types of meetings fairly often. So they understand that what they're doing is relevant, it's driving value. If we need to make some course corrections, we do that. So I think it's, a lot of it comes down to just new ways of communicating.
The word that's coming up and how you approach, along with the founder, it just feels like there's a very intentional way of going about what you're up to. There is no, especially when you talk about risk plan upon risk plan upon risk plan, it feels like there's a very intentional, that's the word that just sort of is ringing in my mind, an intentional way of going about what you're doing. Would you say that that's a word that describes how your leadership team are tackling things?
It is very intentional. And we're also very fortunate because what we are doing is of tremendous interest to big pharma and big biotech. And so we have very frequent interactions with big pharma who are interested in our programs, interested in our platform technology. And we can understand what's important to them, what it is that we're doing. And so, for example, if you talk to several different companies and they all say, oh, this is wonderful, but we'd also like to see this, then we all hear as a company, this is an area that we really need to generate some additional data in, and it's very, very helpful. So I think that adds to the level of intensity of the work that we do and the comprehensiveness of the work, and it's all very intentional.
What would you hope that, however long this runway is for you, what would you hope that if you were going to attend a roast of you at your retirement, what would be 3 words that you would hope folks would be saying about you at that moment?
Well, I would not want to. I would not want to attend a roast.
Well,
I get that every night when I go home. But,
well, not a roast like
no, I don't.
Where they're truly roasting you over the flames, but an honoring or a reflection on who you were to folks as you're entering a new phase of your life and career at that point. What would be 3 things you would hope they would say about you?
Well, I would hope, and something I intentionally try to do is I really try to push people. I try to I have expectations outside of what their own expectations are. And I think that, a lot of people that I've worked with in the past, maybe they were much younger or whatever, I pushed them in certain directions and really pulled the best out of them, which has benefited them. And, I like to think about the work that I do is not only potentially benefiting patient populations, but also the people that I work with. And I want them to feel good about what they do. And so I would hope to hear comments along those lines.
That's awesome. We could probably talk for another hour, Eric, but we're up against the clock here. So I'd like to end with the question we ask all of our guests is if you could go back and have a quiet conversation, or maybe not so quiet, but a conversation with the younger you before you became CEOs or a CEO of a company, what would you say to him? What would be the advice you would give to him?
Well, this is advice that I give to young entrepreneurs and students. I give this advice to them all the time. And even my children. My children all want, they graduate college, they want the perfect position with the best benefits, and they want to work in this field, but they only want to do this portion of this field or that portion of the field. I tell them, if there's an area that you're interested in, it doesn't matter what job you start in. If you have an opportunity to get moved from department to department to department, take that opportunity, learn everything you possibly can about an industry, and not just focus in one little area. But if you have an opportunity to expand, take it. Even if it's a lateral movement, lower pay, doesn't matter, because I just think that such an important part of growth is really having exposure to all different areas of a field that you're interested in.
Mm. And how would, if you had given that to younger Eric, how would he have benefited from hearing that advice?
I think I would have been less specific about my needs, and when I was given opportunities to do this or do that, I always thought about increasing personal value increases in terms of whether it was salary or something like that. But the most rewarding thing that I have done in my life has been able to experience in many different areas at many different levels. And I remember very, very fondly some of the jobs that I had as a young person in biotech, and I like them just as much as I do as chairman of the board of certain companies. And I think that that's really embrace those areas and those opportunities.
Sage advice, really good. My 14-year-old will be home in a few minutes. Would you mind if you stay on and you can give her that advice?
If she's anything like my kids, they don't listen to anything I have.
Well, that's why I'm going to have you tell her, because she won't listen to me. This has been a lot of fun, Eric. I'm sure there's folks that are listening in or watching that are curious to learn more or to connect with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. The best way is to go to our website, gaintherapeutics.com. And if you'd like to learn a little bit about what we're doing, we have a tab there called Perspectives. And there's videotapes, there's tutorials, there's background information. And I hope people are reading it. I find it really interesting, really exciting. But I think that patients and people today want to be much more involved in the treatments that are coming. And this is a great way of being able to learn.
Awesome. Well, we'll put your LinkedIn profile address in the show notes. We'll put Gain's website there, so people can hopefully look those things up and learn more. Thanks again, Eric.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.